Hello everyone, I am going to continue our work on voting behaviour. So hopefully you've watched video 1, which talked about what is social class. This video is going to talk through some of the impact that social class can have on voting behaviour. There are quite a few graphs, so what I'm going to say is I will talk through them. I will try and be quite quick with that. I would advise that you rewind the video or skip it back and listen again. Hopefully that will help. But of course, if you have questions, let me know. Any of the information you're about to see is excellent for using in your essay examples. The document that I'm going to assign you for this week, or have already assigned you, has some facts in it. However, I would be expecting that if you are writing an essay on this topic, you go back and look at these slides, because I'm not just doing this for fun. I mean, it's really interesting. This is like my favourite unit ever to teach, but it's not totally fun. It's also a lot of work finding this, which I don't mind. However, use them. That's what they're there for. You don't have to have every single fact and figure, but in your exam, you will be expected to have a rough understanding. What do I mean by that? Well, hopefully you'll see that social class used to have a strong impact, but it doesn't quite as much now. So it would be good to have a fact or figure that says, oh, look, this amount of people in social class DE voted Labour in 97 or 1992, but in 2017, it was only this percent. So it shows it doesn't matter. The graph you have got on the right there is a really good example over the spate of a few elections to show us how it works. It has grouped them together. So you've got A, B, kind of your higher classes there on the top line, C1, C2, and then DE at the bottom. Have a look at the graph and see if you think, does social class still matter? Okay, hopefully you've paused, you've had a thought. I'm going to go over it. What we can see there is between 1997 and 2017, so that's the space of 20 years, social class AB isn't really hugely different. It's what, within kind of 5-6%? Now, we could argue, well, most of AB voted for Conservative. That would make sense because they're in high jobs. The Conservatives want low taxes, so they get to keep all their money. However, if you take a look at DE at the bottom there, back in 1997, 59% of people who were in category DE, so if you had 100 people with a social class DE, 59 of those voted for the Labour Party. 20 years later, that is reduced to 44, and more in the bottom social classes are voting Conservative. Does that mean social class matters? No, not in this case. So in this case, we see back in 1997, it could well be that social class mattered 20 years ago, because the majority of those in the lower jobs, the lower skilled or the unemployed, were voting Labour. Think about what you know about the Labour Party. They support benefits, they support return to work, they support free education, all things that are going to benefit people in those categories. However, in 2017, there's not much difference between how they voted Conservative and Labour, so it would suggest that now social class doesn't really matter, or it doesn't matter there. What we have here is I managed to find the election results from 1974 right up to 2010. However, I am also giving you access to the 2017 and 19 results, so stay with me on that. What you're going to see here is you've got a table there, and this one only talks about what they're calling upper and middle class, so A, B, and C1. So the table you see in front of you is the percentages of people in that category that voted for that party. If you look at Conservatives, in 1974, so that's here, 56% of the middle class, so 56% of people in categories A, B, and C1 voted for Conservative. Does that surprise you? Probably not. If, however, we go down to 2010, we find that that's dropped to 39%. Same category, same social category, same political party, but a good few years later. Does that suggest social class mattered? Think about it. Again, the middle class in 1974, 19% of those in the middle class voted Labour. It's not really surprising, is it? Because they probably didn't see what Labour would do for them. However, we do see this start to rise. So again, does that suggest that people are not being fussed about social class? They're thinking about other things? Their social class does not influence their decision. The ones that we have here, now this is two different categories. The top half here, okay, is looking at your skilled working class, C2. 1974, 49% voted Labour. That's probably kind of what we'd think. Almost half of the working class voted Labour. However, that's down to a third in 2010. Now, I want you to compare that further with the 2019 information you're going to see and think, oh, do they care about their social class then? Back in the 70s and 80s, people were so determined. I am working class, I am upper class, I am middle class. It was a very proud thing, particularly to be working class. People were determined, I'm not upper, I'm not posh. That's how they determined it. Nowadays, most people don't really realise what social class they are. You've then got on the bottom here, the semi or the unskilled, those who are unemployed, retired and so on. Almost 2/3 in 1974 voted Labour. Almost. In fact, if you were to take Labour and the Lib Dems in there, you've got about 3/4 of that social class on the left wing, remember? However, if we go down to 2010, that's about 40%. That's quite a big jump again. What I'm trying to show with these graphs is that in the 70s and even the early 80s, people were still voting quite a lot with their social class. Nowadays, not so much. So, the next 3 slides I'm going to show you are graphs which analyse voter turnout. These do tend to include the new elections, as long as in your essays you're using the most up-to-date evidence you have. So there will be times when the 2017 or 2015 election is the most recent example because it maybe didn't happen last year. That's fine, as long as you're always using the most up-to-date. There's 3 graphs here. Now, this is for if you're going back and looking at it without the video, just to kind of update you, but I'm going to talk you through this when I change the slides. So, this is based on 2019. These are from Ipsos Mori, as you'll see in the bottom right corner. For those that don't know, Ipsos Mori is a very reliable source. The reason it's reliable is although it is funded by the government and Parliament, it is funded to be impartial. It must not take sides. They do a lot of surveys and interviews into how people voted. They also do lifestyle surveys. They try and find out what the average wage is in the UK or what people's attitudes are towards certain things, and they're neutral. What you will see here are the results by social class of who voted for which party. The blue, or the left-hand column, furthest left, is the Conservatives. The red, that middle column, is Labour Party, and you've got Lib Dems in the orange or on the right-hand side. So take a second to have a look at that. Is there a big difference between the social classes? No, not really. Not what we'd probably expect. Apart from the Labour Party, but if you look, AB, 45% voted Conservative. C1, 45% voted Conservative. C2, 47% voted Conservative. DE, 41%. So every social class category had over 40% of their group voting for the Conservatives. We then see in AB that it was about 1/3 of AB, Class AB, voted for Labour. The same in C1 and C2. DE is the only one that we see is slightly higher, and that would be expected, but the Conservative is still a shock. So looking at that, would you say social class matters? I wouldn't. Because if you're telling me that you've got very nearly the same percentage in social class DE, the unemployed, the retired, the labourers, the low-skilled jobs, with the categories we're using, almost the same amount as those who are doctors, accountants, bankers voting for the Conservatives. They're not voting by social class. There is obviously another reason they voted for the Conservatives, and it is not their social class. This is just another way of showing you the progression over time. Please don't panic looking at this, okay? Take it slow. The first graph is the 1992 election. You've then got one for every election after this, right up until last year's election. So if you need to, hide the bit of the screen so that you only look at 1 year at a time so you don't confuse yourself. If we look at 1992, what this is showing us here is the red line is the percentage of people that voted by their social class for the Labour Party. So if you look at 1992 in the red line only just now, in 1992, under 20% of those in social class category AB voted Labour, under 20. However, we know just under 50% of social class DE voted Labour. So what we see there is, if you look at the graph, the lower the social class, the more likely you are to vote Labour. Does that make sense? That is a habit of asking because I can't see your faces. I am hoping you're nodding and not looking at me like this, because I've seen that face a lot and I miss it. So basically, if you go down the social classes, so AB to C1, C2, DE, the lower your social class, the more likely you are to vote Labour. Yes? Good. Flip it for the Conservatives. The higher your social class, the more likely you are to vote Conservative. That doesn't really surprise us. What is surprising, however, is the changes that you see over time. You do not need to know every one of these examples, but I would pick ones that show you a really, really good difference. So for example, 1992, it's really obvious that social class AB were voting maybe because of their social class, because AB is quite rich, they've got good jobs, they want to keep all their money, low taxes, so most were voting Conservative, very few voted Labour. However, we do find that in 2019 that did change. It had changed over those years, almost just short of 30 years. It had changed. So we had about 30% of the high social class voting Labour and under 50%. But the interesting one is we find DE here. Now, we've just looked at this result. The social class is very close together. You couldn't really make a general conclusion that the lower your social class, the more likely to vote whomever. You can't, because they're so nearly the same. This would suggest that social class really didn't matter. People were voting because of other reasons. And again, just another one. The reason I'm showing you all these graphs is people's minds work in different way. For some, a bar graph is perfect. So if that works for you, or the table I showed you, I'm not saying ignore all of this, but don't worry about learning it all. However, if you are quite systematic and kind of science brain, the line graphs can sometimes work better for you. So find what fits for you. This one, whereas, and I'm going to jump back, whereas this one is showing us the election results by year, okay, by year, this one is showing us it over the years, but it's separated into its social class category. So if you look at the first square here, the first one, this is all of the elections from 97 to 2019, those little dots, so 97, 2001, 2005, 2010, 2015, 17, and 19. And what this is showing us is basically the pattern, to see if there is a pattern of who has voted for what. And we can see little spikes there, but again, you look at 2017-19 and they're pretty much tied. That's a massive suggestion that social class doesn't matter now, but it did. We also look at the difference, A, B, they're not significant there. So think about that. We know in the 2010 election, and you'll need this for one of the activities I'm asking you to do this week, that these are the percentages of the social classes that voted. So for AB, 39% voted Conservative, 26% of AB voted Labour, 29% of AB voted Lib Dem, and 7% of those in the category AB voted for another party, so the Greens or SNP or a small party that we didn't include on the table. So you will need that to come back to. Another point just to add, the turnout by social class. When we talk about turnout, we're talking about how many people bothered to show up and cast their vote. You are more likely to turn out to vote if you're in a higher social class. Why might that be? Do you think people in social class DE have the same awareness of politics, the same understanding of politics, the same ability to watch the news and think critically about what it means as those in the higher? Again, traditionally, now I'm not saying I agree with this, but traditionally your social class AB would be those who have higher level of qualifications. Therefore, they understand the importance of voting and engage with that on a more regular basis. Just to add in here, because this does tie into social class, is education. You could link this if you were writing in your essay about social class, but just make sure that you link it and you don't just say, oh, another factor is education. You've got to say why education links with social class if you use it in a social class essay. If it was a general essay about there are many ways voters' decisions are influenced, discuss, then you could do education by itself. But if you're doing an essay on social class is the most important factor, discuss, you have to make it clear how this links. The reason we know it links is because the lower your social class, the less education you are likely to have. So if you're in category E, you're more likely to be sitting in the low education level, so that's GCSEs or below. What that means is the maximum, the highest level of qualification those groups have are GCSEs or less than that. So that's like saying the highest qualification they have is a Nat 5 at most. You've then got high, so those with a university degree or higher, that are a doctor, doctor of philosophy, so that'll be some of you maybe in the future, things like that. We do know, however, that free tuition in Scotland and the loan system in England has made education more accessible, and higher education is more likely to vote Labour. Some would say because Labour argue for free tuition. They want to help people, they want to give back, they believe education engages in social mobility. Social mobility, the idea that wherever you start, it doesn't matter, it's what you do can move your social class. And the last little bit today, third-party influence. Again, this doesn't overly link with social class, so just be careful how you use it, but I wanted to highlight it because it can be that last knowledge mark in an essay that you're needing. We know that traditional, there are two main parties. We've talked a lot today about Conservative and Labour parties. However, in recent years, the rise of SNP and Lib Dem means that you've almost got a third party to throw into the mix. The impact of the small parties also influences voters. Voters know, right? UKIP are not suddenly going to win a majority in the House of Commons. The Green Party won't. The SNP literally can't because there's not enough constituencies in Scotland to give them a majority. However, who will they align with? The Green Party and SNP are likely to buddy up with Labour. The UKIP supporters are likely to buddy up with Conservatives. So when you're thinking about social class and third-party influence, if you think Conservative is too right-wing and Labour is too left-wing, you're going to look for someone in the middle if you're going by social class. So that can have an impact as well. When we are looking at analysis, so remember your analysis and evaluation marks, class boundaries are not as clear as they were. If you ask a lot of adults now, kind of my generation or slightly younger, a lot won't really know what their social class is. It's not as big a deal because the idea of social mobility, the idea that it doesn't matter what you're born into or where you start out, it's what you make of your life is where you'll end up. Voters also want to know what the party will do for them. It's not now about loyalty. There used to be this idea that if you voted once a Labour voter, always a Labour voter, once a Tory voter, always a Tory voter. That's not the case now. You do see a higher percentage of floating voters or those who are kind of, oh, well, actually, they did really bad in government, so I don't want to vote for them. There's a lot more of that happens. We know class is still there, but political parties have stopped relying on that. The Labour Party used to rely that everyone who was a member of a trade union would vote Labour. Everybody who had worked in a skilled profession like the mines or electricians, labourers, joiners, they would vote Labour. The Conservatives relied on the fact that the rich people will vote for them. They relied on the fact that the very highly educated will vote for them. That doesn't work now. People from all different backgrounds vote for all different parties. We also know education can be linked. This has been seen as influencing the Brexit referendum as well. And the higher the qualification, the more likely someone was to vote Remain. We do see something called realignment taking place. This is on your sheet this week. I haven't discussed it here, but if you read your sheet, it should make sense. Realignment is essentially the idea of people coming back to the party that represents who they are. There was a while of de-alignment, which was a bit like saying, oh, the working class no longer vote Labour, they're drifting away, they're de-aligning from the party that represents working people. We find that realignment is kind of taking place. People are drifting back to Conservatives from those higher social classes. And like we say, we also know that there's no guarantee votes for the top two parties. So that's your social class stuff. It's quite a lot, I know. That is the minimum I would like you to have done by the summer holidays, okay? And I'm going to do another video on age. If you get that done before summer, that would be my preference, but I also know how busy everybody is at this moment in time. Give it your best go. Remember the live time for Google Meets. I'm always happy to see your lovely faces, even though you switch off your cameras and it's just me speaking to myself. But please do join and ask questions or email me at any point, guys.